How many of you have had the opportunity to work on a 25-year project? But sometimes the projects don't even have an end. On today's show, we'll be talking about large-scale change with Seth Kahn. And in Grounds for Thought, I'll be talking about another person who has done large-scale change. Stay with us. Thank you for joining me. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking the resilient leader in you. Could I ask a favor of you before I start? As you watch or listen to this show, please consider what you found most noteworthy, good or not so. Then send me an email about that and make it a comment if you're on YouTube. My commitment to you is that I will do everything in my power to make this show better for you every single week. Thank you very much. I've worked on more than 600 projects, and actually that was when I stopped counting. Some of those projects were brief. For example, there was a major project that I had only 6 hours to complete my part of it. Then there were projects that took 5 years to see any impact. Today, we're going to explore the kind of projects and people who willingly take on huge projects that are large in scale, wide in participation, and significant in impact. For example, consider the James Webb Space Telescope, that one that NASA put up. It's the largest and most powerful space telescope ever built. And it took 25 years from the time it was announced until it began sending back the most extraordinary images of the universe, sometimes in infrared, so that we could see new stars and we could see planets that without dust clouds, all kinds of stuff. Talk about a large in scale, wide in participation, because there were global participants on that, not just NASA. And it certainly is going to have a significant impact. Now, can you imagine the resilience that was called for as they worked on a project that involved a great deal of technology, and technology that was changing at lightning speed across 25 years? My guest today will be talking about organizations who have chosen exactly that kind of project. And I'm going to bring him on screen so that you can see him, and I'm going to tell you all about him. Seth Kahn, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you, Madeline. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's a wonderful to be talking to you. Okay, now, believe it or not, you first appeared on Unlocked in 2020. That was back when I was on radio.
Wow.
Yes, wow is right. I had to kind of pinch myself and say, my God, I've been doing this long? Yes, I have. All right. Now, Seth Kahn is widely recognized as being on the forefront of visionary leadership and a trusted advisor to more than 100 association CEOs and world-class leaders. Seth is a sought-after business strategy specialist and respected thought leader. He's the author of the books Getting Change Right and Getting Innovation Right. Seth started out in street theater. I had to tell them that, Seth, because I always see you even when you're on formal presentations, I can see that little spark behind that. So that's part of you. And he was also part of the early work on the use of storytelling in organizations. And today, though, he's going to be talking about large-scale change being done or planned in companies like Royal Dutch Shell, and I won't even say the next one because it's too long. This is a person who has brought changes to the world simply by being himself. But before I begin the conversation on our topic today, there is another introduction I want to give. Every now and then, you meet someone in your life that stands out. They, they stay in your thoughts. They influence what you do. And they become a real friend in the best sense of the word. I think it must be 30 years since we first met, Seth, and you hit all those marks above.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Once again, welcome to Unlocked.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, well, we're going to jump right into this topic because I think this is just fascinating. What draws an organization or an individual to tackle a project that may take years to accomplish, may not ever be accomplished?
Well, there's got to be a crying need, something that is felt deeply within the soul of the leader, and a sense that they can actually do something about it. Those two things come together, and that's the beginning of a grand challenge. So, for example, I remember sitting with Marla Weston when she was the executive director of the American Nurses Association, and we were brought a news clip, that said nurses were worse off in every health category than the average American citizen, except for smoking. But in terms of weight, in terms of exhaustion, in terms of all of the different health categories, nurses were suffering terribly. And Marla said, I have always wanted to do something about this. And within half an hour, not only had she and her senior team committed to doing something about it, but Marla had come up with the name Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation. That never happens, but it did with Marla. That's an example where the leader said, this is something that we have to do something about. I care about my nurses. I want them to be healthy. And I am now in a position where I could make it happen as the executive director of the ANA.
I think that's a perfect combination because you really need passion, is what I'm hearing,
Yes.
in order to jump into something this large. And then you said she's now in a position. Now, maybe it's not a position. Maybe you have wealth, or maybe you have just finished a degree. I mean, all the kinds of things that really set you up for something. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. And she did have the passion. And I know that this is a show about resilience. The passion is what's going to carry you through the inevitable obstacles. And some of them are soul crushing. So you need a lot of passion to keep on going, to press on.
To press on, indeed. Well, I know we're going to talk about some of those. And in fact, that's kind of the next question I had in my mind. Resilience is essential because life and business never stand still. So I think we should begin talking about one of the projects and the role that resilience did play. But actually, don't make sure. No, let me say that differently. Don't worry if you don't mention the word resilience. I want you to just talk about that project so we get passionate about it too.
Should just pick one, or do you want to jump into
pick one? Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Stop Stigma Together. That's one that I'm currently working on. Stop Stigma Together is the purpose is to eliminate the stigma around mental health and substance use disorders on a national scale. So to get rid of all of the bias and prejudice that keeps people from getting the treatment that they or a loved one or a colleague needs when it comes to a mental health condition or a substance use disorder.
That is indeed a noble goal. So who is trying to do this and how?
Well, there's a 501c3 called Stop Stigma Together that has brought together the leaders of all of the major mental health organizations in the United States. So we have on our national leadership steering team people from the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Mental Health America, the Carter Center. They have a vice president of mental health, and so on, as well as some of the smaller organizations like One Mind, which is a juggernaut of media to fight stigma, or Shatterproof, the organization that's dedicated to eliminating substance use disorders, or the JED Foundation that prevents mental health challenges that result in suicide in high school and college campuses. It brings together all of these. So it's a coalition, essentially. It was started by the Huntsman family in Salt Lake City, Utah, at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute. but it has now got its own center of gravity and has spun off as an independent 501c3 and now represents purely the coalition.
Wow. Now, can you give us a sense of how they're doing this? I mean, I love the idea that it's a coalition because you can't tackle something like this unless you have the players involved. But how are they tackling it? And what are some of the impediments that they're hitting?
Well, every organization that I mentioned is already involved in stigma work because everybody knows that stigma kills, that stigma prevents people from getting the mental health treatment they need. And that can result not just in mental damage, but it can result in suicidality if it's not pursued, mental health care. But they have reached the limits of their own social network. So, for example, the American Psychiatric Association works with all of the psychiatrists who belong and all of the patients and all of the associations they belong to. But that's a finite network, and they need to reach more people. They need to reach people who are not in psychiatric care, for example. So all of those organizations know that it's extremely important and that they need to work with other organizations if they're going to succeed. So that's how and why the coalition forms. How does it work? Well, first of all, we had to have a way to kind of grapple with the issue because it feels kind of overwhelming and sprawling. Fortunately, in 2016, the National Academies did a study on stigma and how to eliminate it on a national level. And they divided it up into 3 dimensions. There's structural stigma, which is stigma that's embedded in laws and policies. And when I say policies, think of workplace policies, scout troop policies, places of worship policies. Stigma can be baked into that so that the employees or the volunteers, simply by being compliant with the policy, are actually perpetuating bias. So that's structural stigma. Then there's social stigma. Social stigma is what happens between 2 or more people, whether they're in a living room, in a workplace, in a community center, anywhere that people gather, a shopping mall. If they're perpetuating beliefs and ideas that perpetuate prejudice around mental health and substance use disorders, that's stigma. And the third is individual stigma. So that's what takes place in the privacy of your own mind. So let me give you an example of individual stigma. When I was 10 years old, my mother developed schizophrenia. It was a horrible thing for my family. My family eventually fell apart. And my mother didn't. So when I was 10 years old, that was 1969. In 1969, not much was known about schizophrenia. However, if you fast forward 30 years, there were great medications that were coming out, and my mother got some of those medications, and she came back about 95%. So she was like a normal human being. She was very educated. In fact, she got her PhD in special education while she suffered from schizophrenia. So she was a very smart person. Imagine now that we're sitting around the dinner table with my wife and my wife's father and my mother-in-law, and my mother's holding her own in a conversation. They're talking about ancient history. I remember the conversation. And I'm looking at my mom, and my mother's hair's a little out of place. She has some food on her blouse that she hasn't cleaned up. And to me, those are signs of her mental illness. And I feel embarrassed and humiliated because my mother looks like that. Now, I didn't open my mouth. Nobody else knew that was going on. It was all happening in the privacy of my own mind. And I knew that that was a problem. That individual stigma was actually keeping me from experiencing love for my own mother. And so I worked with that a lot in therapy and was able to clear that while she was still alive and feel very proud of her and feel the love that I felt for her. But that's an example of individual stigma, and that lives inside of many of us. We all have biases. They're not bad. Go ahead.
Yeah. I had a wonderful guest on a couple of weeks ago. Her name is Amber Di Giovanni, and she was traumatized as a child and was abused badly and lived with that until she was in her early 20s, did not understand, but felt that tremendous guilt and anxiety. And she describes this on the show and how there was a moment when since it was here, she found a friend that she could say, I need to do something. And her friend helped her. And now she's just fine because she went through therapy, etc. But you're right, that what's going on inside our minds is just really can stop us. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And your story is amazing.
So those three dimensions: structural, social, and individual stigma. So that gives us a framework for attacking stigma. So then we'd ask the question, so who do we work together with in any of these areas, these three dimensions? And that helps us to build out our alliance and to attract new partners. We also knew that we had to create a communications program to reach to the general public. And so we worked with the Ad Council, and the Ad Council produced and are still producing a series of PSAs. And they're called Love Your Mind. They're messages from your mind. So it's a pun, a double entendre. It means love, comma, your mind. So your message is telling you this, but also means, of course, to love your mind. And these are fantastic PSAs. You can find them all, as well as resources, at loveyourmindtoday.org. That's the Ad Council's website. And they're reaching millions and millions of Americans. In the last year, they've signed 11 major sports leagues that are now, they're doing PSAs with professional athletes and celebrities, talking about the rituals that they do to keep their minds in shape and why mental health is so important. So we had to have that component. And then we needed to have a measurement component, because you have to get feedback to know whether or not your initiative is working. And we're doing several different measurement initiatives. We were able to participate in the GSS, that's the General Social Survey put on by the United States government. It's the largest single survey of the U.S. population in existence, and we had an element that was established around stigma so that we could set a baseline. We also were able to get funding through the Kennedy Forum and the state of Illinois to audit the state of Illinois' legislation and identify laws that either promote stigma or fight stigma. And we're going to use that to create a statewide legislation scorecard to then go to the other states in our country. So those are examples of some of the activities that we're involved in.
That's amazing. I'm thinking now, how do you decide that a policy does that? Who is it that would actually do that? Would that be lawyers? Would it be psychologists? Would it be a combination?
Social economists.
Social economists.
Social economists who have a specialty in behavioral health. So I'll give you an example of a federal law. There's a federal law that says if you are receiving housing assistance and you fall off of your, the old phrase is fall off the wagon. If you go back into an addiction, that you stop receiving the assistance. It doesn't say that you get more treatment. And, we know from the study of addiction that it's normal to take 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, and that people will try and quit probably 10 or 15 times before they're able to quit a particular substance. Yes. So this is a normal part of the healing process, and yet you're penalized for it. And so now you're a homeless person with a substance use disorder. So that's an example of stigma being baked into legislation.
Got it. Wow. So many things that you have to overcome. But you're doing it. How long are they planning to do this?
The National Academy says it'll take probably 10 to 20 years for the entire country to turn around.
All right.
If you think about the legislation involved, you can understand why it takes so long, because there's, amending legislation, introducing legislation takes a long, long time.
Long time. Yeah. Well, is there another example that you'd like to talk about?
Of another grand challenge that I worked on?
Yes. I want to hear more.
Well, one of my favorites was Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation. I worked on that one. As a consultant, I come in with knowledge of the different frameworks that we use. And I help to conceive, design the grand challenge, and I will often stay on board to launch it. But then I step back and allow the organization to continue going forward on its own. So I worked on Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation with Marla for 4 years. And that was a real pleasure to do that. And we had, again, built an alliance of organizations. Her board of directors was extremely involved. The chair of her board, who is Pam Cipriano, who is now the executive director of an international nurses organization, was a strong advocate. And it's always wonderful when a leader on the board of directors is a strong advocate. Pam worked very closely with us and attended many presentations. So we were able to get all of the state nurse association organizations on board. I worked with CEOs of hospitals. And just to give you an example, most CEOs of hospitals will see feeding nurses healthy food in the middle of the night as a cost center, right? So
Yeah.
they'd rather they eat out of the vending machines, because then they don't have to hire cooks and they don't have to hire people to stand behind the counters and serve them, and then they feel like that at least they're not losing that much money. But what they don't realize is that if your entire nurse force from midnight to 8 a.m. is living off of Snicker bars and popcorn, is that they're more likely to make a mistake. They're more likely to make a mistake in medication, in running technology, in interfacing with the doctor, because of the inevitable spikes of the sugar going up and down and the exhaustion that accompanies it. So it really is an investment in the patient care to make sure that the nurses are well fed. And that could be as simple as preparing, some brown rice, broccoli, and chicken that's available in the middle of the night for someone who works the night shift.
Wow. I was going to ask you, what are some of the challenges that you hit, but you gave me such a perfect example.
Yeah.
I,
So,
but let me ask you this: how difficult is it to bring, say, a new player into a big project like this? Because I know you're involved in something like that.
yes, you mean bringing like a new CEO into the Grand Challenge, or a new partner or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah.
It depends. If we get warm introductions, which is how I prefer to work, it can go very fast. We built the national leadership steering team of the Stop Stigma together in 4 months. And that's because my client, Dr. Mark Rappaport, who at that time was the CEO of the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, had an extensive social network, and he was able to introduce me to people. And so I walked into those conversations with his trust. And then people would, give me the time of day and listen to what I had to say. And there was no time lag where they had to check me out, because they knew, since I was associated with Mark, that I was trustworthy. And it moved extremely fast.
Yeah.
And that's the key to the whole thing. And so these grand challenges spread through social networks. So that's key. Like, let's say you hire me to do a grand challenge. The first thing I'm going to do is sit down with you and make a list of everybody you know. And then you'll write letters of introduction. I'll go meet all those people. So let's say you give me 30 people, and since they're working in a high trust environment, I can probably get 20 of them engaged.
Mm.
And then we've got all of their networks, and it just keeps going like that.
Gotcha.
And it can move at very fast speed.
Was there any particular challenge, though, that it really took some work to figure out how you're going to overcome that?
Most challenges are like that. When you're doing a grand challenge, you're taking on something that nobody has ever succeeded at before. So there's not a recipe. And one of the things that I often have to set the expectations for with my clients, and they'll give lip service to this in the beginning, but they'll feel it in short order, is that learning is so important. Learning is, I know you very well, and I know how much you value learning, but most managers think of learning as an add-on. It's like something extra, unless they're in technology, because there you just can't stop learning and stay in the game. But if you're not in technology, they think, well, learning is something that HR does so that you can, continue to grow. They don't recognize that learning is actually fundamental to success. And so when you go into a grand challenge, there's all kinds of learning activities that happen from the get-go. What did we try? What didn't work? Why didn't it work? Who else has tried this? Why did they fail? And when you do a lot of that, you discover that you're in an area where there's a lot of failure, and that can be dispiriting, right? People can think, oh my God, what have we gotten into? However, I will say that in my grand challenges, I always do an assessment before I get involved to determine whether or not I believe that success is possible. And I've turned down grand challenges before because I felt like that it was just not set up to succeed. But when it is possible, it's the most exciting thing in the world, because you're going to change the world in a way that really is going to make a positive difference.
Yes. Well, and I think it goes back to that early comment that to do it, you have to have a crying need, and you have to believe, the person has to believe that they can do something. So I think those are probably two things you look for. Is there anything else you look for?
So you have to have the capability. I mean, I would put that in with the second one. I kind of lump two
Yeah,
things
yeah,
together there, the passion and the capability. But people can be very passionate about things that they don't have any ability to actually, or they don't have enough of a capability
yeah.
to influence the world. So,
Mhm.
and one of the ways that you can check that out is just look at the mission of the organization and see if it's fully aligned with the grand challenge. So the American Nurses Association exists to promote nurses. And so taking on nurses' health makes perfect
Mm,
sense. If
yeah,
the American Nurses Association wanted to address climate change, they would have a tough time justifying why they're in that space. They might be able to address things like, hospitals, being climate friendly, but they couldn't take on climate change writ
yeah.
large because it's not in their bailiwick.
Mm. Now, speaking of climate, one of the groups that you've worked with, or one of the challenges, is called Thriving Earth Exchange. Now, I happen to really love Mother Nature. I love the earth. I mean, I love the universe, all of that. And I have to take care of that. So tell me about that grand challenge.
Sure. The Thriving Earth Exchange was the first grand challenge I worked on, and it was done. Chris McEntee at that time was the CEO of the American Geophysical Union. The American Geophysical Union is an organization whose name does not represent who the members are because it's international. It's not American. It's not a union, and it encompasses Earth and space, not just geophysical. But it's basically the association, the professional association of all of the Earth and space scientists. That's who it is. And they took on the grand challenge to make sure that interventions done at the local level were earth friendly at the geo level, at the global level. So, for example, let's say that you are a mayor of a small town and you've got too much salt in your water. You could filter out the salt and dump it on the edge of town, and that would take care of your constituents. But it's not good for the earth because now you got a big pile of salt just right outside the city limits. They wanted to make sure that whatever interventions any local people came up with was fundamentally good for the earth. In order to do that, they wanted to pair those local leaders with a scientist from their own organization. In order to do that, they had to be able to pay the scientist. So they brought in a third party who would pay for the scientist to work with the local leaders. So the Thriving Earth Exchange brings together local leaders, scientists, and funders to address natural and man made disasters.
Is that still going on?
It is still going on. They're scaling. They have, I think, over 140 projects today. That was many years ago that I worked with them. When I left, I think they had 5 or 6 projects. They have 140 now, and their goal is to have thousands. So they're looking at scaling it.
Absolutely wonderful. But now here's one that I have to I have to question. I'm hoping they'll be earth friendly, and that's called, I think, SmartFields.
Oh, SmartFields. SmartFields. So that wasn't a grand challenge, but that was, I mean, it could have been. SmartFields was about installing fiber optics down underground in oil and gas fields for Royal Dutch Shell. And that was very earth friendly because you see, when a large company like Shell or BP or ExxonMobil takes over an oil or a gas field, they like to get it after it's been discovered because discovering an oil and gas field costs as much money as it does to build the infrastructure. So say if it costs $30 million to build an oil rig, it takes $30 million to find the right location to build the oil rig. And then they usually like to get rid of it before it's near the end because things really trail off at the end and it's not profitable. So they have this window where they want to own the field. They want to buy it after it's discovered. They want to run it, pull the oil and gas out of the ground. And when it starts to decline, they want to sell it off to someone else. Well, when you don't know what shape that oil or gas field is underground, that window, it gets very small, right? But when you know the shape, you can start earlier and you can run it longer. And that makes it more friendly to nature because you're not ripping up as much of the planet as you're harvesting the field. And it's actually quite significant when you have an operation as big as Royal Dutch Shell's. And so SmartFields was about getting these fiber optic cables down in the well so that you could discover. Now, when I first got involved with them, I had a very naive understanding of what shape an oil or gas field might be. I thought it was kind of like an upside down balloon. You draw in it and suck it out, right? But I found out it could be like a bowl of potato chips, where each potato chip is a deposit.
Yeah.
But think of all of those little saddles laying on top of each other.
Yeah.
How do you stick the straw in such a way that you're maximizing pulling out all of the oil and gas? Well, if you've mapped it with fiber optics, you can do that because you know exactly where to put it. So that was it. So that was a large project with Royal Dutch Shell that I was involved in.
Now, you're not an engineer, so why did they bring you in?
Because of my change experience. My specialty in change is getting engagement, support, and buy-in. That's what I do. And to me, those make or break a large-scale change project. If you don't have engagement, then you're never going to get support and buy-in. Support and buy-in are required because every large-scale change project has problems. It's the nature of it. Obstacles, log jams, whatever you want to call them, they happen all the time. This gets back to resilience. And so you want to have, in order to be successful, you want to have that engagement, which leads to the support and buy-in. And they were having a challenge doing that at Shell when they called me in. The mandate came from headquarters in Rijswijk, and the people in New Orleans ring the cash register more than any other location on the planet for Royal Dutch Shell. And their response, cowboy response, I can say this because I'm a Texan, cowboy response is, who the hell are you to tell me how to run my oil and gas field? You know, I know what I'm doing. But Rijswijk, of course, had a very good reason for doing that. But there was a conflict, and they couldn't get the folks in New Orleans and Houston to buy in. And so that's why they brought me in.
Can you tell us one of the things that you did so we can kind of feel what that was like?
Sure. So we brought together a team from Rijswijk and a team from New Orleans to intentionally bring it to a head. We brought in the people who had the mandate, who had the spreadsheets, who knew the financial justifications for doing this, and we brought together the people in New Orleans who were resisting it. And we had a meeting that was 2 days long, and it almost came to fisticuffs at one point in the meeting. The tension really ratcheted up. And I and another guy were facilitating it, and it was our job to allow the tension to climb, but not to top out. We didn't want any fights to break out. I remember that the folks from New Orleans were saying, you know, you can't predict what's going to happen on our rigs. You just can't. You don't have the sophisticated modeling to know it. Isn't that true? And they finally got the guys from Rijswijk to say, yeah, that's true. They said, you're right. We cannot predict what's going to happen. However, all of the information we have and all of the experience we've seen all over the planet tells us this would be a good thing. And the guys from New Orleans said, okay, I'll buy that. That you should have said that to begin with. Instead of telling us what our results were going to be, you should have said that, and we probably would have gotten on board. And that was the thing that unlocked. And from there on, all of a sudden, they started cooperating and collaborating. And then the other guy and I couldn't write fast enough to keep up with all their ideas.
You know, it's remarkable when you're working with people. I mean, their intention is good because they want to stay business, etc. And yet, there's just something where they assumed something about the other, and you had the capability to hold them while they explored and actually found it. Am I
Right.
hearing you right?
Yes, you are. And that's because the other guy who was facilitating, who was a Shell employee, and myself, we believed this was going to work. Well, we could see both sides. We were able to hold both sides and understand and empathize. You know, we didn't write the guys off in New Orleans for being angry about being told what to do. We didn't write off the guys in Rijswijk for communicating in a way that was less than optimal. We knew they both had their best intentions at heart.
Yeah.
And so we were able to hold that energy until they resolved it. And then we were running as fast as we could to keep up with them.
Yeah. You know, it's extraordinary. A lot of times in my research, I will encounter this aspect of people who have the capacity to sit with two opposing ideas in their mind and not get blown away by it. I mean, you can't be an executive really unless you can do that. So
Right.
It's great to see where you had to do it in that particular situation. Well, you know, that kind of thing takes a lot of work. Now, I know it does, and it takes a lot of energy. So working on this kind of project demands energy. Because it has to be constantly, you have to be constantly fresh as you work with it. Uh, so how do you maintain your own ability to thrive in this kind of work?
Well, I have a very strong personal spiritual practice. And it involves, I get up every morning and I stretch for half an hour and I focus my mind and then I meditate for 30 minutes. And then I walk my dogs. And those three things are the foundation of my day in and day out. And when I'm traveling on business, I'm not able to walk my dogs, which is sad, but that's the way it is. I don't travel too much, but I still do the other two things. And that creates that a solid foundation that I draw from all day long. And I get tremendous pleasure out of my dogs in particular. I mean, I really relish the walks. It's 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening, every day. Keeps me in shape, keeps me healthy. But also, I just love those two little critters. I think they're the best in the world. I like to talk to them. I give them treats while we walk, and they're well trained. And they. I just think they're fantastic. And I live with them, so I get the benefit of their presence all day long.
I'm sitting here thinking there are so many dog lovers in the world, and I bet you they know exactly what you mean by that.
You know, I found out the other day, half the United States has a dog.
Good.
Half the United States.
To me, that's music, because I think dogs were placed on this earth to give us an example of what unconditional love really looks like.
Beautiful.
You
agree? They do that. That's why they fill me up every morning.
Yeah.
That's what they fill me up with.
Yep. Fabulous. But you also have a tradition, and please forgive me if I'm asking you for something that you don't wish to share, and we'll just cut this out of the tape. But, but you also have an annual tradition where you really, not just for an hour in the morning, do this and this, but you take yourself away from the world. Can you talk about that?
Sure, happy to. I just got back from that, and I'm feeling really recharged from it. Every July or August, I go up into the Adirondack Mountains, about 100 miles south of the Canadian border. When it's warm enough that you can bathe in a mountain stream. It's a very small window of time, so I try and hit it every year. And I go into the backcountry with my German Shepherd, Kaya, just the two of us. And I just got back. I was there for 4 nights in the woods, camping next to a river. I consider it a vision quest, and I model it on the vision quest format that I learned in 1991 when I attended a vision quest. So I've got the first day is dedicated to crying for a vision, which means I'm asking, what is it that I can do in the world to serve the people that I love? How do I address the challenges I'm facing? The second day is liminal space, which is like dreaming. It's like anything is possible. And the third day is reincorporation, which literally means coming back into the body. And that's where I take what it is that I'm learning and I try and understand how I'm going to put it into action when I get home. That sounds very conceptual when I say it, but believe me, a lot of the time is just spent sitting still in nature and receiving the beauty of nature all around me.
Yes. Excuse me. There is absolutely nothing, as far as I'm concerned, like going out into the green of nature. I call it the green. And I used to live in Colorado, and I kept saying to everybody, it's not green enough for me. And it wasn't. But there's something about I call it the chi that comes out of the plants.
Yeah, right. It's the life force that comes out of the plants. It's what it is. It's the earth, and it's everything. It's the rocks and the river and the animals and the plants. It's all of it. And it's beautiful.
And I love the fact that you take time to think about, you called it you're asking for a purpose, or you said it differently, but
crying for vision.
Crying for vision. That's what it was.
It'll often come from suffering, the crying part. You see something in the world that's really bothering you, or some element of your life feels out of balance, and I'm asking the greater force, the ineffable. I'm asking for guidance, for help, and opening myself up to that. And in my spiritual tradition, I'm not separate from that. I'm a manifestation of that force, and so it's about quieting my own mind and ego enough that I can receive. Who I am, why I'm here, what I am to do in these circumstances today, whatever they might be.
You've inspired me again. I need to get this back into what I do more. When I advise people, I tell them just take 5 minutes in the morning and just sit quietly. And when you said to me, do a half-hour stretching and a half-hour of meditation, you went, I don't know if I could convince people to do that immediately, but I'm going to tell them to watch you, and we'll see. We'll see if I can.
I just would say I also go to the gym a lot. I go to the gym 4 days a week. The reason I do these things is because I have to manage my energy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm driven to do it. I'm either anxious or I don't have enough energy, one of the two.
Yeah.
And this is a way for me to modulate that, and I get immediate results. So that means every day I'm fine tuning myself, coming back into balance. It's not something that's done once. It's an ongoing thing for me.
Those are called practices, and that one I understand. I tell people, you wouldn't step out on the concert stage and play something for the audience unless you had been practicing scales. In fact, my sister is a concert pianist, and she says, no, you practice the scales all the time. Then you go out to perform.
That's right. And those are the fundamentals. And that's something I think that's really important, because a lot of times we all like to advance and get more and more complex. But it's like, meditation is fundamentally about being with your breath and being present. Yeah. And that's about as fundamental as it gets. Some people will say, well, that sounds so boring. No, it's the scales. You're practicing the scales, so you don't have to think when it's time for your finger to go to that location, because you've done it so much.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I have one more question for you, although I'd like to continue this conversation, but this one I have to ask you. There are so many ideas that I've been thinking about of grand challenges. Like, what about the nexus between ethics and privacy and security? I mean, I just think that is a really interesting topic that somebody ought to be working on, because it impinges on all of us. If there's a person in my wonderful audience, and I have a wonderful audience, Seth, who feels called to address a major challenge, not the one I just spoke of, but something, why should they begin?
Well, they should begin if they believe that they have the resources or can amass the resources to take it on. Grand challenges take significant resources. They don't always take significant budgets. It's not necessarily money. Money always helps, but it's not money. I've done many grand challenges on a shoestring, but you have to have the connections, the people. You have to be part of a social web that is going to have what's called a common agenda. That's the phrase. A common agenda means the one thing that we're all willing to work towards, that we're all invested in coming to pass. So, for example, with Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation, measurably improving America's 4 million nurses was the common agenda. And that's something that hospital CEOs were just as invested in as policymakers, as patients, as nurse organizations. All of them were invested in those 4 million nurses being as healthy as they possibly could be. So you need that common agenda.
Great. Well, Seth, this has been a wonderful conversation that has gone on entirely too short. But I just want to thank you again for your time and all the amazing things that you do. And by the way, audience, he has a podcast. It's called Seth Kahn's Grand Challenges.
Yep. And you can find it on visionaryleadership.com. That's my website.
Well, yeah.
I need to say, Madeline, I asked you if I could be on your show. So thank you. Thank you. I love your show.
Oh,
so I really appreciate being here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself.
I usually share thoughts from something in a book, but today I want to share my thoughts about a person who has inspired me for years. In truth, there are many people in my life who have inspired me, but to inspire me, they have to be what they say. Because if I see them as living their talk, then I know it's possible for a human, including me, to achieve it as well. Why be inspired by something that is unattainable? It just doesn't make sense. Certainly not to someone like me who is very practical. Zenon's Zudans pushed himself and always got up again when things were tough. And he pushed me hard to show me my potential, along with allowing me to fail without recrimination. Inspired me always. Rose Positelli demanded that we work hard. She got us up early on Sunday mornings so that we could go cut the asparagus before going to church. And she had been up herself preparing things so that she could join us in the field to cut asparagus herself, and then cleaned us up and drove us to church. John Reisman spoke always of the power of language and the need to assure that language used in everyday conversation be generative so that the spirit and the capabilities of others were never dampened. He only told me what I had done right as I worked on my dissertation, so that my focus was always on what worked rather than on problems that needed correction. Hildegard of Bingen of the 12th century told the truth to the church leaders of the time as she pursued her many talents consistent with that truth, as evidenced in her writings. Steve Jobs said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who would do it." And he did. And yes, the person I want to talk about is Steve Jobs, who died in 2011. Do I think that I can change the world like him? Actually, I think I do. Steve's arena, however, was larger than the one I choose to work in. But I am crazy enough to think I can change the world in which I work. But that's another story. Here I want to talk about two things that Steve said and how I see it as important in today's world as it was when he said it. He said, most people never ask, and that's what separates sometimes the people that can do things from the people that just dream about them. In my research on resilience, I saw that those who are highly resilient ask questions. They are insatiably curious. It's one of the early practices I recommend to my clients. Keep asking questions. When listening to a talk, determine to be the first person to raise your hand to ask a question or post to the chat. It is a practice that opens the mind by focusing on the edges of what you hear or read or watch. What's just under the edge? What can be learned if I lift the corner? Is there a deeper perspective that can be found by reading another author of the same topic? Is there another meaning to a word? Where did the word come from? One of the pure joys of asking questions is that the edge keeps moving out as we ask more questions. It's a different way to explore the universe. Steve also said, if you are working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you. Let me say that again. If you are working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you. I just read that quotation that in my research to do this piece. When I read it, I thought, wait, that's what I've always said. Because when I work with staff or teams, I work to understand what each person is interested in so that the job at hand can be related to their personal interests. When I'm successful at that, my management tasks become effortless because they're doing their own motivation, their own management of their work. And yes, it takes time at the beginning, but it's only at the beginning because then it's done for the rest of the project. I've often helped groups write a future story, for example, for themselves. And to do this, I ask them always to begin with writing stories about themselves. When that happens, the future story shows glimpses of their personal stories. They can't help it. And each person recognizes themselves in the future story. And suddenly, just as Steve said, they begin to care about the joint future. What did Seth say? A common agenda? Suddenly, just as Steve said, they begin to care about the joint future. And the vision pulls them toward it. Steve Jobs said the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Are you crazy enough to decide to change the world? I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. As I mentioned at the very beginning, please tell me what was noteworthy in today's show, good or not so. And let me know in a comment on YouTube or a simple email direct to me. Thank you. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.